All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to my presentation. My name is Dr. Mikhail Gofman. I'm from California State University, Fullerton, and I'll be presenting our work titled Identity and War, the Role of Biometrics in the Russia-Ukraine Crisis. This is joint work with my former student and now collaborator, Maria Villa. So before I get started, I would like to point out that this work focuses on the ongoing events. So some of the information presented here may need to be updated as the events progress. So this is a very active and dynamic issue. So first of all, a bit of a background. On February 24th in 2022, Russia has launched a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This is a major escalation of the conflict that really began in 2014 with the Russian annexation of Crimea. Some analysts, they actually say, they consider that this conflict has begun even before 2014. It has been brewing around the 2000s. So the existing analysis and research related to the conflict, it has focused primarily on the humanitarian, geopolitical, military, economic, and information warfare angles, whereas our work will present a survey and analysis of the roles of the biometric technologies and how they have shaped this conflict. So far, although there have been many reports of the different uses of biometrics throughout the conflict, there hasn't been a comprehensive work that tries to organize, classify, and draw some sort of conclusions of how biometrics is actually impacting this conflict. Before we present, I would like to share with you the methodology which we use in our analysis. So first, we begin by presenting all the different reports regarding on how biometrics has been used to handle the Ukrainian refugee crisis and the humanitarian impacts, how biometrics are being used on the battlefield, how biometrics are being used to gather intelligence, how Russia currently is using biometrics in order to repress dissidents or those who are against the war, and finally, how biometrics is being used in waging the information warfare. Next, for each of the areas that we identify, we will analyze and point out some of the positive and negative externalities which the use of biometrics had in that particular field. Where appropriate, we try to propose solutions to any problems that we have identified. And finally, we conclude by trying to forecast how the biometrics will be used as the conflict evolves. Also, since this is one of the first conflicts where biometrics, where the modern biometric technologies are playing such an active role, we also try to see if we can draw any lessons out of this and see if those lessons can be applied in times of future crisis. So first, I will begin by talking how biometrics is being used in the Ukrainian refugee crisis and what impacts that it has. Next, I will talk about how biometrics is being used on the battlefield, intelligence gathering, and information warfare. And finally, I conclude by talking about how biometrics are being used in wartime Russia, and finally try to draw some conclusions about how biometrics may be used in the future based on what we have seen so far. So next, I'll talk about how biometrics is being used to handle the refugee crisis. So a bit of a background, since the war has started, about 11.3 million Ukrainians have fled their homes since the start of the conflict. This is the worst refugee crisis since World War II. And biometric technologies have played very significant roles on how the refugees have experienced their immigration processes as they try to seek safety in other countries. Also, biometrics has been used in order to help UN distribute the humanitarian aid. So let's talk about those two in detail. So first and foremost, one of the first things that we need to know is that according to the regulations of the European Union, Ukrainian refugees who possess a biometric passport, they can travel visa-free in the Schengen zone, which consists of the countries featured on the map. And on the right, you can see the Ukrainian biometric passport. The little square with a circle in the middle, that's the symbol used to identify a biometric passport. So basically, what exactly is a biometric passport? So biometric passport is a passport that has an embedded chip that contains the passport holder's biometric information, which includes face, fingerprints, and can also store iris. As of now, Ukrainian passports, they store biometrics. The Ukrainian government doesn't require children below the age of 12 to have their biometrics included in the passport. And one of the benefits of such passports in terms of security is that they're very difficult to forge. So, and as Ukrainian refugees try to flee to countries in the Schengen zone, biometric passports allow the border control agencies to quickly verify the identities of the refugees, which allows them for seamless entry. And also, it helps to keep those countries secure by screening out those trying to enter the country who have false documents. Because a biometric passport is much more difficult to forge than other forms of documentation. And whether the passport actually belongs to the holder can be verified by scanning the holder's fingerprints, for example, in case of Ukrainian refugees, and then seeing if those fingerprints match against the fingerprints in the passport that they present. So one of the issues, though, which we need to be aware of is that not all Ukrainians actually possess a biometric passport. Recently, this has become a little bit less of a problem as Ukrainians without a biometric passport can seek admissions to countries in Europe based on the humanitarian grounds. So this is a new regulation passed since the conflict has begun. However, it is reasonable to assume that probably that immigration process is more difficult for the Ukrainian refugees who don't have a biometric passport than those who do. So one of the conclusions which we came through in our analysis is that the Ukrainian government should continue to strive to promote biometric passports within its society as means of simplifying travel for its citizens and thus helping with the refugee situation. However, one of the things that we need to be aware of here is that the Ukrainian government has been doing this for a while, and one of the challenges was that some Ukrainian citizens cannot afford the costs of the Ukrainian passport. So those are some of the challenges that the Ukrainian government needs to look at, which it probably doesn't have the capacity to do right now due to the ongoing conflict. So also, another way in which biometrics has impacted the ongoing crisis is that many refugees who are seeking asylum in countries such as UK and Canada must have their biometrics scanned in order to obtain an entry visa into those countries. One of the issues which has been reported on continuously was that many refugees have been frustrated about having to travel long distances to biometric registration offices, and once there, having to wait a very long time to register their biometrics. There have also been reports of the employees of the office not even showing up for their appointments, which caused further distress for the refugees. So, as a way to cope with some of those challenges, the countries try to adapt some measures. So basically, those measures are meant to address by the fact that there are just not enough offices and office staff. So some of the ways in which they try to address that is, one example is opening so Canada has opened an office in Warsaw, Poland, and because Poland is one of the major locations where the refugees from Ukraine flee to, having an office there is good because a lot of refugees which seek asylum in other countries, they can simply cross the border with Poland and then have their biometric scan to go to another country to seek asylum. Also, the Canadian government has sent mobile biometric testing kits so that more sites can be opened across Europe and quickly. Also, Canada has adopted a risk-based approach to biometric scanning. So basically, the biometric registration requirement for those seeking to obtain visa has been waived for those of ages younger than 17 and those older than 61. There are also some other provisions which we won't discuss here, but you can see them in our paper. So let's analyze those measures. So like we said before, opening an office in Poland will be useful because a lot of Ukrainians, when they flee the crisis, they cross the border with Poland and then seek asylum in other countries. So availability of Canada's office for scanning biometrics can be very useful because those seeking asylum in Canada can easily do it there. And again, there's very high concentration of Ukrainian refugees in Poland. Now, as far as the measure to deploy biometric test kits is also a good measure because this will allow rapid deployment of more biometric scanning websites across Europe, thus allowing Ukrainian refugees seeking asylum to Canada, not having to travel to distant offices. However, rapid rollout of biometric sites does bring concerns as well, because those sites can become targets, for example, for theft of the information by the Russian side, and then the use of that information for intimidation. So, for example, if a site is deployed in Ukraine, where things are volatile, where, for example, a site can be captured, it is very important that there is a way for the data to be sufficiently protected. One way is ensuring physical security of data, storing the data offsite in a way that access to it can be restricted in case, for example, the site is raided. As far as Canada's so-called risk-based approach, where they waive biometrics based on the age groups, we don't think this is the best way forward, because waiving the biometric requirement can have consequences for the national security, as this can open up a potential for unwanted individuals getting into the country. And also, this scheme is based on the assumption that individuals younger than 10 and older than 61 are less likely to commit crimes or other undesirable acts. However, as history shows, there are many incidents where individuals in both groups have been known to commit serious crimes as well as acts of terror. Finally, the scheme might not even be effective in helping expedite the biometric registration for those groups, because children or elderly will often travel in the company of their parent and guardian in case of children, and maybe in case of the caretaker for somebody over 61 because they're elderly. And the caretaker will probably not be exempt from the biometric scanning. So therefore, this may still cause delays in getting children and elderly to Canada from Ukraine. So, so basically, our suggestion as a better approach is we recommend to not waive the biometric requirements unconditionally. Instead, countries should allocate funds and train workforce, which would allow sufficient deployment of biometric offices and sites across Europe, so that in case of crisis, sites can be deployed to easily accommodate as many refugees as necessary. Also, we suggest the use of automation as well as workforce optimization to help reduce the operating costs of biometric sites, and then use the savings to help fund the above initiative to roll out more biometric sites and train more workforce capable of doing biometric enrollments. So all of this should also be accompanied by logistics for rapidly rolling out the sites as needed in case of a crisis. Also, some countries like Britain, they have used an approach called post-arrival biometric checks. So instead of the refugees having to scan their biometrics in order to obtain visa, instead, they could get their biometrics scanned after they arrive in the country. This approach needs more evaluation and thought, we feel, because what happens if an undesirable individual happens to enter the country? Post-arrival checks may make it more difficult to deal with them than to simply prevent them from entering. More analysis needs to be done on this. So, another place where biometrics has been heavily used is the United States High Commissioner program that is responsible for providing cash assistance to the Ukrainian refugees. Basically, the way in which it works is a refugee applies for aid. Then, if their application is approved, they get a text message. The text message is then verified by a UN employee at the UNHCR office. And in order to prove the enrollment of the applicant, they would scan their fingerprint. And finally, after doing that, the refugee would get a PIN number where they can use the nearest ATM in order to withdraw cash aid. This approach seems to be quite viable because it's by using fingerprint scanning and verification, it can help to ensure accountability and prevent the humanitarian fraud aid, which humanitarian aid fraud, which happens frequently enough. However, this raises the concern over something called universality. Basically, the universality of a biometric trait refers to how likely is everybody to possess the trait. So, for example, let's say refugee isn't able to present their fingerprints because they have, missing fingers or even no fingerprints. That does happen. For example, if somebody does a lot of work with sandpaper. So, UN is currently also working to support the iris scanning as well. We believe this is a good idea because supporting multiple types of biometrics can help to accommodate a broader spectrum of refugees that are not able to present, for example, fingerprints. They can be enrolled using iris and vice versa. Supporting different kinds of biometrics will make this more accessible, we believe. And this concludes our discussion of how the biometrics are being used in the refugee crisis. Next, we talk how biometrics are being used on the battlefield for intelligence gathering applications and information warfare. So, one of the biggest uses of biometrics on the battlefield have been the face search engines, especially the Clearview face search engine and the FindClone. Excuse me, I'm a bit raspy. So the face search engines basically allow you to scan a face of an individual and then search social networks or databases for a matching face. So the most popular face search engines have been Clearview and FindClone. So Clearview is a face recognition technology engine which allows you to use a mobile platform to scan somebody's face and then identify the face in social network posts. WWII, which is the company behind it, has donated the service to the use of the Ukrainian army. So far, the Ukrainian army has used it to identify dead and captured Russian soldiers. As of the time of our paper, 8,600 dead and captured Russian soldiers have been reportedly identified. Also, they have used it to identify the perpetrators of the war crimes. And also, controversially, the Ukrainian army has contacted the families of the Russian dead and detained. And this was done as means of promoting anti-war sentiment in the Russian public. So, such approaches can definitely help ensure accountability because it has often happened that some Russian soldiers bragged about committing certain war crimes on their social networks. So scanning the faces of the captured soldiers and then matching them against the social media posts, this would allow for identification of the perpetrators and ensuring accountability for the crimes. Also, one of the things that has accompanied this war was the dissemination of fake news, and scanning the faces and verifying them against the faces on the internet can help to verify such statements. For example, we could verify is the face that some news site claims to appear in certain photos is actually the face of a particular person. Sorry about that. So, however, it is not clear whether the tactics used by the Ukrainian military to contact the families of the Russian dead or captives is an effective way of promoting the anti-war sentiment. Could it have the opposite effect of angering the Russian public and actually making them more pro-war? The facts are not quite clear. Now, there is no documented use of face matching technology being used on the battlefield by Russia. Also, access to Clearview AI and to similar Polish service known as PIMICE is banned to Russian users out of fear of exploitation. However, it is highly likely that Russia does use such capabilities, possibly on the battlefield, because Russia indeed possesses such capability. So, for example, Russia has a service called FindClone and FindFace, which are face matching services. FindClone specifically can match person's face against the Russian social networks. One of the most popular ones is Vkontakte. Also, it is quite reasonable to assume that Russia has classified technologies that are being used as well. Again, although there is no documented use of Russia using such technologies, it doesn't mean this is not happening. Perhaps as the conflict evolves, we may see it happen. So, also, FindClone service has been used in the information gathering and warfare by investigators of the Netherlands-based investigative journalism company known as Bellingcat. They used it to collect evidence of Russian soldiers committing war crimes in Ukraine, and also the tactical systems French military defense company has similarly used FindClone in order to gather open source intelligence. One of the examples was that they found that one of the faces which appeared in a photo was a well-known Russian official. Okay, you can see our paper for details. So, analyzing this, although face matching can definitely help to ensure accountability and sort through and gather evidence for war crimes, there are some concerns. One is false positive. So any face matching technology is prone to generating at least some false positives. And in this case, it can have serious consequences. So for example, if a Russian captive is captured by the Ukrainian army and a face matching service falsely matches them against a photo of war crimes, they may get falsely committed and suffer the consequences. Also, there could be framing attempts by, for example, somebody trying to frame a Russian soldier by planting fake media posts on the internet where they allegedly participate in war crimes in hoping that they get captured and then their face be matched against the fake photographs. Finally, the face matching services allow users to opt out. Basically, you can tell a service like WWII, please don't include my face in the matching. So as a result, war criminals may use that option potentially in order to opt out. It is not clear whether they're able to do that or not. But based on what is described, it sounds like they should be. Finally, we talk about how biometrics are being used in wartime Russia. So, first and foremost, Russia has been forcefully deporting some of the Ukrainian residents in Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine to Russia. So the way in which it works is that the deportees are taken from their places in Ukraine. They're passed through the filtration camps where their biometrics get collected, and finally they're forcefully resettled in Russia. It is unknown what types of biometrics are collected or what is their intended use. However, this is very concerning, as those biometrics can potentially be used for example, if they collect face, they can use that face in order to track the deportees as they travel around Russia. We'll talk more about how that could be done. It could also be used in order to blackmail those deportees by saying that, for example, if you speak out against Ukraine, just know we're tracking you. We have your biometrics. We can easily find you, or potentially use their biometrics in order to create things like, for example, deepfakes or other slanderous material. It can also be faces, for example, can also be used to create propaganda as means of helping to bolster the war sentiment, or in order to send messages to the Ukrainian side. Even if refugees choose to leave Russia, which they reportedly are able to do, the fact that Russia has their biometrics is concerning, because they could then still track the former deportees on the social networks and then blackmail them. And they can also monitor them through things like hack surveillance systems. And in the past, surveillance systems have been hacked. So also, the biometrics in Russia also affects the native Russians as well, especially those who speak out against the war. So this is because Russia has the world's largest face recognition camera network in the world. So the system reportedly has 170,000 cameras as of 2020. The cameras are deployed on the streets, on the subways, and those cameras are connected to the Safe City face recognition system, which sifts through all of the video data and can identify the individuals in the video. On multiple occasions, the system has been used in order to suppress anti-war movements and to arrest dissidents. So let's go ahead and let's talk about that. So in June 12, 2022, there was an incident during the Russia Day holiday. So there was an anti-war protest, and the system was used to identify 67 activists in the crowd, and those people have been arrested. On July 25th, 2022, face recognition has been used to arrest the leader of the Russian Union of Right Forces Party, named Leonid Gofman, who was in the subway. So the camera has recognized his face, which led to his arrest. A more recent development, which came after a paper was accepted, Russia has recently announced a mobilization of men, all of whom are pretty much required to go to the military. Although the mobilization has been declared to be partial, in practice, it seems like people of all ages and conditions are actually being conscripted. So, and the face surveillance system is being used right now in order to identify those who are trying to dodge the mobilization. In this photo, we can see people being tracked on the escalator, and the text below, it says in Russian, the person who has been identified in the camera, there is police already waiting for him at the end of this escalator. So, our analysis basically concludes that very little can be done in order to control how Russia is using the face recognition system internally for repression. However, dissidents can use some of the standard techniques like using face coverings, but they need to be careful because according to the Russian reports, the system can reportedly recognize the faces even if 40% of the face is covered. So a more full face covering seems to be needed. There is no way to verify whether the system is actually able to do that, but it's based on the Russian reports. So finally, we conclude by trying to extrapolate from what we learned on how biometrics can be used in the future. So as the conflict evolves, we'll probably see the continued use of biometrics in the current applications, which we have discussed, such as identifying war criminals, locating strategic targets. For example, if there is a report that a certain general is traveling to some place in Ukraine, but the Ukrainian army can use media footage in order to match the face of the general, which was captured by, for example, Ukrainian intelligence operatives against the footage to verify that that's indeed him, and then in order to take him out. As Ukraine has been well known for taking out the strategic generals and other individuals. Face matching search engines are also likely to continue being used. And perhaps we may even see emergence of other types of matching. For example, verifying the voice of soldiers, of officials, and others to make sure that what is being said is indeed being said by whom it is claiming to be, that it's not just part of some disinformation campaign. Also, it is likely that we may see more sophisticated biometric technologies come into play, such as the DNA biometrics. Indeed, one of the applications of DNA biometrics can be used to help fight the human trafficking problem in Ukraine, which is being radically exacerbated by the ongoing war. So basically, the human trafficking works in all kinds of ways. For example, there are men all over the world who are trying to exploit the Ukrainian women who have been affected by the war, offering them, asylum. But in fact, that's an exchange for services of all kinds, including sexual. Another example is children being smuggled out of the country, also possibly for purposes of exploitation. This is one of the areas where we feel biometrics can seriously help. So, for example, deploying biometric verification systems at the Ukrainian borders can help those who use forged documents in their human trafficking attempts. In fact, document forgery is a very common technique used to get past the border control agencies by forging the passports and other documents of the individuals being trafficked or of the traffickers themselves. Biometric passports, which we have discussed before, can be a very good way to help defeat that, because a biometric passport allows to actually match the biometrics of the individual against the passports on the biometrics, and thus help defeat the attempts to use forged documents. Also, another powerful biometric technique, which is already available, it's called kinship testing kits. A kinship testing kit can help to identify cases where children are being smuggled out of the country by the fake parents. So basically, traffickers claim to be parents of the children when in fact they're not. So kinship test kits can actually be used in order to verify whether the individual can actually be biologically related to the child. So by deploying those kits, and they're very quick and very accurate, they can be used in order to catch attempts to traffic children out of Ukraine. Also, another benefit of kinship test kits, perhaps there could be a way to use them in order to, for example, help reunite families who have been separated by war. For example, children who have lost their parents, or where children have been separated from their parents, and parents have thought their children have died, and their bodies not recovered. And when the child is recovered, kinship test kits can be used to link those children back to the parents. They're just one example, and more research is needed on that. But we think kinship test kits at the border can surely help at least fight to some degree the human trafficking problem. Also, we may see the DNA biometrics being used in other applications. In fact, that's already beginning to happen. A French company called WWII has donated a mobile biometric lab to Ukraine. It's basically a van that has a biometrics DNA lab inside of it, and it's currently being used to identify the more data sites of destruction, because oftentimes, for example, facial traits and other recognizable traits, they cannot be discerned because of the damage that has been done to them. So this could also mean that this will be used more in the future, and we'll probably see more uses of the biometrics-based forensics in the future. Perhaps we'll see more countries donating biometric capabilities to Ukraine, which could help, not just with doing forensics, but also potentially, doing things like implementing the kinship test kits. In conclusion, as we have seen, biometrics have significantly shaped the Russia-Ukraine conflict. The role of biometrics will likely evolve with the conflict. And we also believe that there is much motivation to study the impact of biometrics on the ongoing conflict, because the lessons which we learn right now can help us prepare for the next conflict and allow us to use biometrics more effectively to the benefit of the causes of just war by the side we believe is right, also to help the refugees, to help fight human trafficking, as well as deal with other forms of the humanitarian crisis. At the same time, we can also be ready to address some of the negative impacts which stem from the use of biometrics during war. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you for listening, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.